Hello, everyone. My name is Jacob Fortum. I'm the host of this podcast, Doers Within Emerging Markets. And I just want to share my experience with using Anchor so far. When the pandemic started, I thought about starting a podcast, and the whole idea was to bring in some really amazing folks that are doing some great work in their respective industries within the emerging markets. And the Anchor platform really helped me get the word out there and also just make it a lot easier for me to invite the guest and just share the amazing experiences they've had and the amazing work they're doing in their respective industries within the emerging markets. Um, it's pretty fun. You don't even worry about the technical part of making a podcast. You actually just focus more on the content. And Anchor has done it really well for me. So I will highly encourage anybody who is trying to start a podcast to try to use. Just check out Anchor, and I think you won't regret it. I'm not a technical person, but if you listen to these episodes that I've been publishing so far, it seems like I know what the technical part of it, but Anchor helps you take care of the technical part, and you just focus on the content. So feel free to check it out. I highly encourage you. Won't regret it, and it's right there. You don't pay anything. So in times like this, I think starting a podcast and getting the word out there, irrespective of what you're doing, will be a really great experience. So thank you guys for listening to my episodes. Please check out Anchor, and you will have a great time. So cheers, guys, and see you guys next episode. Thanks. Hello.
Hi, Jacob.
Yes,
How are you?
I'm great.
This is awesome.
Yes, thank you, Kevin, for being here. So, hello, listeners. So, welcome to the Time for Emerging Markets. I'm here with Kevin Richardson. Kevin, please, can you introduce yourself?
Hello, everybody. Thank you for having me, Jacob. My name is Kevin Richardson, and I'm a graduate student in the Master Science program in Finance program at Babson College. Prior to that, I was in private equity and real estate in Boston, and I'm really excited to be here. This is my first podcast experience, and so this is really exciting.
Cool. It's awesome. Beyond that, Kevin is just a very, I think, very insightful as well as very methodological. Let me say, human being, individual, and
that's very nice of you, Jake.
No, like honestly, and I've been fortunate to know Kevin now for about 6 months, half a year.
Yeah, it feels longer.
It feels longer, yeah. So, but before actually, just to the audience, I'm also in the same program as Kevin, and when we had our Facebook group, when you get admitted into a program, and I was just really excited, to kind of know my classmates. So I came across Kevin's profile, and on his news feed, he had this paper that he had published from his undergrad. I think it was his undergrad. It was an undergrad thesis, right?
It was my undergrad. It was a paper I wrote during my senior year in college.
Exactly. Yeah, cool. And just the title was like something that caught my attention, and when I read it, I just knew for some reason this guy would be cool, and in many different ways, because the paper is so well written. It's equivalent to a graduate, like for personally, I think it's like a PhD thesis paper. Maybe I'm exaggerating here, but
just a little bit.
Yeah, well, that's fair enough. But I think this was one of the outputs of Kevin's brilliance, and I think it encompasses a lot about just the scope of how emerging markets interact with different parties, and it has this kind of time frame that is very fascinating from 1987 to 2016. But I'll allow Kevin to give us like a kind of the rundown of the paper, but also like his mindset before he started writing the paper and all that interesting stuff. So, but the paper is really good. I'll recommend people to check it out. The title of the paper is the relationship between foreign direct investment and economic growth in emerging markets, emerging economies. Sorry. So, but I'll just go right into it, and I'll allow Kevin to give us some of like his some tips, but also like his mindset before he wrote the paper, and like some interesting stuff that's in the paper, which I think is something that I think you guys would love to listen to. So, so Kevin, just give us your experience in college, by the way, and like why you decided to pick the major that you went for in college, and let's start there. I think that'll be interesting.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Jacob. So I went to college in New Hampshire. I went to a really small liberal arts college, very beautiful campus called Colby Sawyer College. It's in the town of New London. And while there, I was fortunate to, although it was a really small school, we're fortunate to have students from very diverse backgrounds, a lot of international students, also a lot of very diverse domestic students, but also just a diversity of perspectives and upbringing. So it was pretty cool to be there, and I had a really great time there. Yeah. Also, while there, I was, I was fortunate to be a part of several organizations, prominent amongst which was me getting to serve as president of student government during my junior and senior year in college. And then another pretty key component of my time in college was being a member of our Western Honors Society. And so this paper came about through the Western Honors Society. So the way that program worked was that we were considered scholars, a group of us, and at the culmination of our studies, sometime in our senior year, we had to do a senior project. Yeah. And so for me, I started to think about this about a year out, sometime in my junior year. What I wanted to do that will be, first of all, will have relevance to my experiences as an African student who's also lived in many different a few different places. And then something that will last a while, something that will have impact beyond my time in college, something that can benefit others after me. Yeah. And so I thought that I could maybe write an essay. This is how this idea started. So I met with my friend who eventually became my co-author, Ibrahim Rana. And we brainstormed a lot of things. This was back in 2017. And so at the time, we were in the heat of Brexit and all of its confusion. And so the first idea that came to me was writing a paper on Brexit, but actually looking at the impact of Brexit, not on the UK, but actually on foreign countries. So on the US and on other developing economies that are heavily tied to the UK economy. Yeah. And so I just tell this story to give the background to how we ended up writing this paper. Absolutely. And then we realized that there had actually been a pretty strong paper by a really strong paper by a group of very, very competitive, strong academic programs. Yeah. In both the US and the UK, yeah, on just about what we're thinking of. And so we realized we had to squash that idea because we didn't think we could write any paper that could compare to that. Exactly. So, but my co-author, Ibrahim, is Pakistani and I'm Ghanaian. And so, we thought, why not write a paper instead that we can really relate to, something that we feel personal, that's something that's personal, that we we
can relate to, something
we could relate to, and that we were deeply invested in.
Exactly.
Right, exactly. And so we thought about it and we realized Pakistan and Ghana are both at different levels, but in many ways considered developing countries or emerging economies. Yeah. We haven't quite reached Western sophistication, but at the same time we're we're on a pretty decent path
Yeah.
to developing our economies. And so that's kind of where this idea came from. I also will say that this was this was freshly into the presidency of Ghana's current president, Nana Akufo-Addo, and he had made a speech at the UN General Assembly not too long before, where he sort of acknowledged the role of foreign aid in many sub-Saharan African countries, but that foreign aid kind of fell short because it put basic idea was that it put economic power in the hands of political leaders, and a lot of times these come in the forms of grants, which are hardly ever properly accounted for. So he was kind of calling for foreign direct investment as an alternative to foreign aid. So that got me thinking. I said, well, what is foreign aid exactly, and does it really have any impact? Like, what does it do? Is it a good alternative, or are we still going to just see an inflow of funds into these African and other emerging countries, but no real impact? And so, hence the birth of this paper. So yeah, that's kind of the background of the paper, and I'll talk later about some of the support that we got to actually get the paper to where it got published. But I hope that kind of gives you a sense of where this idea came from.
No, that's pretty cool. And I just kind of a little bit of summary. So I think it's like it was really like the right timing, both from the international level, locally in Ghana, but also your partnership kind of gave like those three aspects kind of gave you that notch that this had to be something written. Am I right? Or
yeah, no, absolutely. Timing is you're certainly very right about just it being the right time. It was just a culmination of just many timing issues and events in Ghana and just in Africa in general, but also even in the US. And I'll get into some of that. You see some of that in the paper as well. But I think that the time this paper, there couldn't have been a better time for me to work with Ibrahim on this paper.
Exactly. And I think, I mean, the relevance of this paper, even like back in 2017, I think even moving forward, 2020, and thereafter 2020, I think it has a lot of it's going to be more relevant moving forward. So I think it's a really good paper from my perspective. So just going deep into it. So I can see, like, just from your introduction, it was very interesting that you actually said, there has been some form of FDI, back in like 2500 BC. That's pretty fascinating because I always think of FDI like, maybe, in the, most likely, the 80s. Actually, I'll not think of it back to 20. So like, that's for me, that stood out. Is this something that was new to you when you were working on the paper?
Yeah, absolutely. No, I didn't I didn't know. I didn't expect. I certainly didn't think FDI went that far back, and I definitely didn't think of the concept of foreign direct investment as far back as 2500 BC. Way beyond our current civilization. And I say current civilization because this just shows that people even back then were pretty civilized for their time.
Yes.
This is just a different dispensation, and so civilization existed then and it exists now. It's just in a different flavor. But no, you're totally right. I will say that foreign direct investment, as we know it today, the mechanics of it, investors or institutions putting money towards businesses, as we know it today, is more recent. It dates back to maybe the 20th century. It was mostly led by countries like the US and the UK and some of these other long-standing economic superpowers. But the concept itself of foreign direct investment dates far back, well before the 20th century. I talk about the Sumerian merchants, and I can share some readings about that, some papers on that topic.
Yeah. Do you have some in mind, or can you keep that public?
There's a paper in 2001 by Lipsy. I will share that link maybe after this this podcast. Yeah, but it's also referenced in my paper, so if anyone gets the chance to take a look at the paper, you'll also see that there.
Yeah, definitely. And I'll give you just give a summary of how, first of all, before we even go into paper, what was the process like writing this paper? Because I know, it's well written, and it got to the point where you got this really great publication. Just give us the thought process. But I think some of the listeners would love to first of all understand how was your mindset writing the paper. What was your what was your strategy in terms of okay, I'm gonna block this time period, and I'm gonna I think that would be very interesting to some of the speakers, some of the listeners, on how you were writing the paper.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so I'm just thinking about the question, and the truth is, and maybe the publishers will actually not be happy to hear that, but the truth is that there was no strategy in the beginning. There really was not a strategy in the beginning. We just didn't know where we wanted to go, because, like I mentioned, this was an optional project, and the nature of this project, for the honors program, was you could really do anything. And some of my friends did some really fascinating work, but it was very freestyle. You could do anything from your own mini documentary to a photo series. There was not really a framework that we had to go by, or any there was not a strong structure to adhere to. So I had reached out to Ibrahim, and I had reached out to one of our professors he was actually new at the college at the time. But when we reached out to the department, he was readily available and willing to guide us through, because he had also gone through his own writing dissertation through graduate school and all of that, and so he could share the insights he could, and his perspective on just writing, good academic writing, and just finding resources. I think that was very key. Finding the right resources. How much should we have read, and how much understanding do we want to gain before we even get into the topic?
Interesting.
His name is, I didn't seek his permission, but I will say his name anyway, because I think he deserves the credit. Lauren Waymeyer.
Yes.
And so I think he was really instrumental to sort of guiding us, in the whole writing and publication process. Now, the first thing you notice in the paper is that we picked 30 countries, and so sorry, go ahead.
No, please go ahead. Please go ahead, please.
Yeah, one might ask, how did we come about these 30 countries?
Yes.
And to be quite frank with you, it was not a very sophisticated selection process. We looked at some, reputable published lists of emerging countries. So we looked at the JP Morgan Emerging Markets Bond Index. We looked at the Morgan Stanley Capital International's Emerging Market Index as well. And then Bloomberg had a list of its top 20 emerging markets that had been published. That list is a bit dated. It was from 2013, but we didn't come across a more recent list ranking from Bloomberg, and so we used it anyway. And it just so happened that a lot of these countries overlapped in the JP Morgan index and the Morgan Stanley index, and so we thought that, and so from there we to strengthen our quantitative analysis, we looked for countries from these lists that also had consistent data going back, a reasonable amount of time. And a reasonable amount of time for us was 30 years. We felt that 30 years was a manageable amount of time or manageable amount of data to use, but also at the same time substantial enough to make a reasonable case. We felt that 10 or 20 years was a bit too short because of the financial crisis of '08 and the dot-com bubble and all of that. Those were disruptive times. But 30 years going back to about 1987, it kind of allowed us to smooth for some of those market anomalies. And so that's kind of why we went with 30 years. And that was our sophisticated process for coming up with these 30 countries. And not so surprising, Ghana and Pakistan were there. So that made us both happy.
Yeah, exactly. That's pretty cool. I mean, I think that was my kind of the next kind of question I was trying to ask, like why 30 countries and why the 30-year period. But it sounds like I mean it was an educated guess, and it kind of worked out because to some degree you got some. I think the results or the findings you arrived at was, I think, it's quite reasonable. So. So I mean that worked out well for both of you guys. And just in terms of like I mean just like diving deep now, since we've started talking about the paper, I can tell, like, in terms of your analysis, you used the case for BRICS. Was there I mean, in conjunction to the 30 countries you picked, was that in line with what you thought about, or is this something that, I mean, is in line with your methodology of picking the countries to begin with?
I'm not sure if I follow the question.
Yeah, sure. So I said, you had these BRICS countries as your, like, the BRICS is actually in line with you picking the like going through with the JP Morgan Emerging Market Bond Index, right?
Yeah.
As well as that's pretty cool. And just give us like an overview of your findings, but I think, I mean, it'll be pretty interesting from, I mean, before, what you were thinking before, like your hypothesis versus what you actually got out of the paper. I think it'd be good to see that difference. If you had any, and what was like the most fascinating things that you got out of the paper, out of writing this paper as well?
Right. So I'm trying to think of how to answer that. I understand the question now.
Yes.
Initially, we had thought about writing the topic of this. The title of this paper initially was going to be the impact of foreign direct investment on economic growth. But if you think about that, that already assumes that we are already concluding that there is impact of foreign direct investment on economic growth. We didn't have anything to back that quite yet. And so when we spoke with our, I call him our research coordinator, Lauren, he said he encouraged us to, kind of steer away from biases going into the paper, instead going with an open mind to see what we discover. Let the data do the talking instead, because then you can make a stronger case backed by research or by data, and that makes absolute sense to me. So instead, we looked at the relationship. We wanted to investigate if there was even a relationship at all, and you see that at the end in our conclusion. And so when we picked these countries and we picked this time frame now, the question was, okay, what do you do with this now? What do you do? The data was readily available, and anyone can see the data, really, because the World Bank does a really, really good job of compiling this data on an annual basis, as long as it's available, as long as it's released by the countries. And so the question was what to really do with it. And 30 countries, we realized that while these are all emerging countries, or in some way or form, they're emerging, but in different, I don't want to say classes, but in different flavors. Like if you look at India, for instance, and you look at Ghana, for instance, they're both emerging, but India's economy is several times larger than Ghana's economy. If you look at GDP per capita versus between both countries, that's also a different story. But altogether, output from each of those countries is substantially
diverse. And if you look at investment coming into each of those countries, again, there's quite a gap. So we figured two things. One, it will be kind of difficult. It would be difficult to analyze each of these countries individually, and we don't know what story exactly we'd be able to tell with that. We might have as well focused on just one country and written the paper on that one country. It'll also make the paper really cumbersome given the time constraint we had and just the amount of tools that we had to do any meaningful analysis. So that was one part. And on the other hand, we couldn't just aggregate all of these 30 countries and analyze them as in one bucket. And so we started to think. Now, there's been, in our lifetimes as millennials or even before, we've heard and learned a lot about the BRICS countries, and in some instances they've been described as the next superpowers. They're the emerging superpowers after what we have now, China and the US and the UK, the traditional superpowers. The BRICS countries have been kind of described as the next what's to come. And so it made sense to us to look at them as a group and see how much they've evolved over time as economies, but also how much has come in by way of foreign investment to these countries. How much investors from particularly the West have gone in and put capital to work and to see those economies grow, if at all. So that was one bucket that we were interested in looking at. And then after that, it just made sense to us. Our thought process was that we could, it'll be manageable to look at the rest of the countries on a continental basis. And so then we broke it up into Africa, Asia, Europe, and then we did Latin and South America, I think is what we called it in the paper. I'm just going to double check that that's what we called it.
I think that is right. You said Central and South America.
Sorry, yeah, so Central and South America. I will also add that we, in the end, we also looked specifically at just Mexico, and that honestly was a unique opportunity we had. It wasn't something that we had planned for at the beginning of the paper, but we had the opportunity to travel to Mexico and interact with a few business owners. This was arranged through one of my professors at school, and so we were able to gain some unique insight into foreign business in the nature of foreign businesses in Mexico. And this was actually particularly relevant at the time of writing because this is a time where President Trump had been elected, and the U.S. was starting to see a dramatic shift in its eco-nationalistic rhetoric. So more focus on America first versus traditionally America plus everybody else. It was more America first, and then maybe other countries, and even those other countries, there was some selectivity. And the arguments can be made for or against that. But that's not the point of this conversation. But for Mexico, this was also particularly interesting because the U.S. forms about 40% of Mexico's foreign direct inflows come directly from the United States. And so with threats to that partnership, because at the time we're seeing threats to the North Atlantic Free Trade Agreement, NAFTA, and if that went away, Mexico risked losing about 40% of its foreign direct inflow. So that's again back to your point about timing. This was just about the right time to explore some of these topics and to get in the conversation on exactly. That. So anyway, I hope I addressed sort of how we broke down our country groupings and how we sort of approached the analysis. I hope that question was addressed.
No, you definitely did address it well, and I think just like the nitty gritty bit, I actually didn't know you went to Mexico actually to get the some data on this. How was the experience? If you don't mind
No,
sharing
absolutely.
that.
Again, back to timing. This was great because
Yeah.
this was just about spring break. And where do college students like to go during spring?
Wow.
No, again, this trip was actually unexpected, but it's very much appreciated. We had a phenomenal time there. This particular professor at school, I used to hang around and play racquetball with probably on a weekly basis, and so we'll just catch up and talk about what's going on. And so I mentioned this project I was working on, and so he brought up that he knew some, he was very good friends with some business owners and business sort of like officials or offices in Mexico.
Okay.
And interestingly, these guys one of them run a company that was from South Korea, but it was a South Korean company based in Mexico. So that was just like, that gave us opportunity for very, tangible experience, like, very direct perspective on real foreign direct investment. This is a real foreign business, specifically in Mexico, that we could sort of talk about. And so that was interesting. And it gave us the opportunity to talk about sort of
like the interrelationship between like South Korea, Mexico, and the US. Like it's like a really trilateral trade thing.
And again, like I mentioned a short while ago, because this was around the time where there was sort of uncertainty about NAFTA. These businesses were kind of in limbo, so we could really interact with the business owners, administrators, and sort of get their opinion, their perspective on where things stood with NAFTA renegotiation. And so that was a great time for us to be there in Mexico.
No, that's pretty.
Yeah, it was pretty cool. Neat, and I'm really grateful to that professor in particular for arranging that. The trip was also funded by the school, and so it was just great. We got to spend spring break out in the sun in Mexico, have a good time there, but also be able to get additional insight into writing this paper. It was more than a win-win. It was like a win-win-win-win-win for us. Yeah, exactly. So it was a good time. We also interacted with another business owner who translated. So this was a little different perspective. He did translations for another foreign company when translated books from different languages into Spanish that could be used in Mexico. And so but he had been doing this for several decades, probably throughout 3 or 4 decades. And so again, this was kind of a unique perspective because he had experienced different waves, different economic cycles, and so could kind of share his insight on the shifting rhetoric of NAFTA and what he felt that could mean for small scale businesses, like his translation shop. So that was interesting. But my little plug: if you have the chance to go to Mexico, don't think twice about it. You should do it. And you'll have a good time there.
I don't know about the climate right now, but
after COVID-19, I mean, no.
We'll get into that.